Peter Green, the Green God. You probably know already, but here's just a very brief introduction. He was a guitar virtuoso, probably now best known for two huge hits that he had with Fleetwood Mac, Albatross and Black Magic Woman.
Got a black magic woman. Got a black magic woman.
Green actually came up with the name Fleetwood Mac, named after the rhythm section. So Mick Fleetwood, the drummer, and John McVie, the bassist. Mick Fleetwood later suggested Green did this because he was self-effacing and never really wanted to be the front man, but also because it gave him a way out. There was still a band if Green chose to leave. According to Mick Fleetwood's book, Peter Green's behavior became increasingly unpredictable after he started taking LSD, and he took a lot of LSD. Green became disillusioned with the commercial nature of the music scene, and he didn't like playing the hits every night. He wanted the band to give away all their income to charity, which obviously didn't go down well with a bunch of boozy, hedonistic, gigging musicians in the 1960s. Mick writes, "Once Peter understood that the rest of us weren't going to change our minds, he began acting crazier with each passing day. He took to wearing robes, caftans, and a huge wooden crucifix. He grew his hair and beard very long, and when he spoke to the press, he would only discuss his search for God." Fleetwood continues, Pete left the band for good during a sold-out European tour in February 1970, but was very responsible about it, agreeing to fulfill all of his obligations. "We were in Munich when a bunch of well-to-do German hippies got a hold of him and took him to their commune. They all lived in a big old house where Peter joined them, getting fried on LSD for a few days. After that, Green ended up as a labourer on a farm." In 1976, the Buckingham Nicks permutation of Fleetwood Mac were hugely popular, and they were on a press tour in London. Mick writes, "We were also met with a sobering surprise when Peter Green showed up at our hotel and stayed in our rooms for a few nights. Peter had let himself go. He was unkempt, his hair long and straggly, and he had put on a good deal of weight. There was an aggression in his manner that we'd never seen before, and it was disturbing. It didn't bode well, and the next time we returned to England in April 1977, we learned that Peter had been committed to a mental institution for threatening our former manager, Clifford Davis, at gunpoint over sending him royalty checks that Peter didn't want to cash." But in spite of all these issues and problems, Peter lived on, and he only died a couple of years ago in 2020. Number 2, more misadventures with psychedelics. This time it's another band member. Jeremy Spencer is a slide guitarist, and he joined Fleetwood Mac in 1967. In 1971, so only a year after Peter Green had left the band, the group were doing a tour of America. In his book, Mick Fleetwood writes, "When we arrived in San Francisco, Danny and Jeremy took some mescaline and it really did a number on them, Jeremy in particular. Jeremy didn't return that night, so the next morning we went to the police. We asked around about those cults who were known for taking in runaways and others ripe for the picking. They'd sequester them away and brainwash them until they'd renounced their former lives and pledged allegiance to the cult. Spencer was missing for 4 days. He was eventually found in the Children of God's warehouse in downtown LA. The Children of God is now defunct, but at one point it had thousands of members, including River and Joaquin Phoenix and Rose McGowan. To say the least, the Children of God group does not have a good reputation. They were very cultish, and they seem to have typically abused vulnerable and marginalized people. Mick writes that when they found him, Jeremy's long hair had been shorn to his skull, he was wearing dirty clothes, and he would only answer to the name Jonathan. Spencer became a major recruiter for the sect, and the two of them, so that was Spencer and his wife, spent the rest of the year visiting branches all over the country. So that was another band member gone, at least partially through misadventures with psychedelics. So in Fleetwood Mac, we can really see the darker, more sinister side of the hippie movement and the drug culture in America at that time. Number 3, cocaine. Mick refers to Fleetwood Mac's 1975 self-titled album as the White Album, and that's a tongue-in-cheek reference to cocaine. This era of the band are notorious for their cocaine use. So we go from 2 human casualties from the psychedelics in the 60s straight on to cocaine in the 70s. How Mick Fleetwood survived all this, I don't know. Fleetwood said that the drug was part of the culture of the studio they were working in, which was Sound City in LA. He writes, "We found that a quick blast of rocket fuel gave us the energy to keep at it until we got everything just right. There wasn't going to be a short way round this, considering how many perfectionists we now had in the group." He continues, "At the time, everyone in LA at every level of entertainment was doing it. This was the first wave, the tsunami of white powder that rolled in and drowned everyone in that city in the 1970s and 1980s. Biblical. He says that in Sound City there was an engineer who would test the cocaine for purity with a set of oils. Fleetwood says it was like a chemistry lesson. By the time the group was touring the hugely successful album Rumors, they were buying cocaine in bulk. And after every song in their live shows, the road manager would bring a silver tray full of bottle caps of cocaine for the band members who wanted them." Mick writes, "These antics earned me the disreputable accolade, the King of Toot, according to all manner of English tabloids in the 1980s. When they were recording the 1987 album Tango in the Night, good album by the way, it was it was being recorded in Lindsey Buckingham's home studio. Mick writes, "I always hung around during recording, so I spent a lot of time with Lindsey, but more often than not, I'd find myself holed up in the trailer in his driveway, waiting for drug dealers to pay me a visit. I'd go to work and be lonely because there was no partying going on. Then I'd go back to Malibu and have these wild times with a collection of characters I'd befriended, from Gary Busey to Robin Williams to Nick Nolte." Of Lindsey Buckingham, Mick writes, "He didn't want to see Stevie and me destroying ourselves with substances, and he didn't want to be dragged back into the drama of all that came with Fleetwood Mac. He told us directly that he just couldn't do it." Christine McVie would distance herself from the group for similar reasons a few years later. Mick Fleetwood kept up the lifestyle of drinking and drugging until 1990, or around then, when he would have been about 43 years old. Number 4, the con artist. Mick had managed to keep his band going through thick and thin, and through so many lineup changes that it's hard to keep track, and that's a testament to his personality. But his other business decisions were not successful, and he filed for bankruptcy twice. But that's really only because his outgoings were insane from all the drugs, I imagine. And if you're drunk and high all the time, you're not going to be making great business decisions. The cliche is, don't get involved in the restaurant industry, but all the showbiz people do it anyway. They just can't resist. In the early 90s, Fleetwood opened a restaurant/music venue in Los Angeles called Fleetwood's LA Blues. Apparently, according to the FBI, some of the financiers and business partners in this venture were linked to the Gambino crime family. so the place never got a liquor license and thus failed after a couple of months. So, after this failure and recently divorced, Mick meets Christopher Rockankor, who had several aliases and who is now a well known French con man. But obviously, Mick didn't know that at the time. Rockankor would pretend to be part of the French nobility or related to Hollywood royalty or some rich New York banking family, depending on who he was talking to. Rockankor promised to invest in Fleetwood's restaurant and conned him out of favours and money. The con man, of course, failed to invest in the restaurant. He was a career criminal. This guy really hurt a lot of people. Mick is pretty wise and self aware about this one. He writes, I got what I deserved. I believed that the money was going to drop out of the sky for me in my time of need. And so I was the fool. I was ripe for the picking.